Okay, we're back, and just to continue this series on writing by request from Lou, we're going to finish up this first part on handwriting and visual motor integration. It's a little bit of a departure, you'll see what I mean. It relates to visual motor integration in the sense that we are using our eyes to create a code in most cases that we're going to decipher, and typically this also translates into some movement as well. Okay, let's go through these with you. The point of these exercises is to start to develop the notion of turning symbols into reality. And so we'll do that in different ways through these different activities, but you'll see we are not exactly writing, but we're creating a language of sorts in each of these instances, okay? Let's start with the first one, which is much more related to actual language. Let's go through this. This is a basic activity. It's called coding, and you can see the link there. You can download it off of the website shown. And this coding activity, as you will see, it amounts to basically a grid. Across the top you have numbers, and across the side you have some letters. And so there's different activities that you can do with this, and certainly you're free to do as you wish. The goal is very straightforward. All you're doing is you're coordinating, searching for a letter on the grid using the grid numbers, or you can identify the grid numbers based on the letter. And so let's go through a couple of examples of what you can do with this. You could ask a child, for example, to identify what letter appears at the junction of C2, and so they'd follow along and they'd say it was a T. You could say, well, where is the letter O? And they would have to find the O and tell you that it's at C4. Something like that, okay? I'd like to encourage you also to have the child use their fingers to point at the numbers and the letters in the grid. And then also you can do this certainly at different distances. You can do it up close and you could do it at far. And you can mix it up that way. Why would we do that? Well, doing it near and far or alternating works different visual skills for us, and that's always important, okay? There's different things that you can do with this, and these are explored somewhat in this activity, including just spelling letters, and so you could give the child the code to spell cat. And likewise, they might have some fun with you creating their own code to create a word for you, okay? Let's move on to our next activity. This next activity is called coding on the walking rail, but we're going to modify it for you. Pretty much all of these activities in this series are from clinical use in therapeutic programs. What we're going to do is try and change it up so that you can do these more easily at home and give you a little bit more variety, okay? Coding on the walking rail is really straightforward. Really what it amounts to is the child is going to draw on paper the footsteps that they're going to take to reach a certain goal, in this case from one end of the rail to the next. And they're equating that symbol that they draw for the feet placement to the reality of actually going through that. There's a number of things that you can do with this. You can use different symbols. You can use feet and hand symbols. You don't have to stick to a rail or a straight line. You can certainly make a pathway through the living room, through the house, and they will still, the goal is the same, they will have to draw out for you what steps they must take to make that happen. And so if you have a symbol, maybe it's a triangle for a hand, well, then you use your hand, not your foot. And maybe the symbol for the foot is a square, something to that effect. You can read through this activity and get a sense of what else is going on here. I'm going to move on to the next activity, and let's have a look. This next activity is great. Typically what would happen is the child is facing a blackboard, a whiteboard, and they are drawing for you what you draw on their back. And we start by just getting them aware of the positioning of things on their back so that they're aware of the body. And so in the first instance, what we have is a grid of 9 circles on the back. If you like, you don't draw these on the back. What you can do is draw the back on the whiteboard and draw the circles on the whiteboard. And when you touch the child or draw a circle on the child's back, they have to indicate to you where on the drawing is that occurring. So it makes them aware of what's going on and getting a sense of what you're doing. And so then you move on to step 2. And this activity takes you through a number of sequenced activities. They're progressively loaded. You'll see that the drawing or the element that you're drawing on the back becomes a little more complicated. They have to identify the shape and possibly the letter that you're drawing. They have to repeat for you what you're drawing on the back onto the board or the paper in front of you. And now on that, because not everybody has a whiteboard or a blackboard to work with, I certainly strongly encourage you to just use a piece of white paper in front of you on the table. And if you're drawing on the back, by all means, they can repeat that for you. What you're drawing, they can repeat that for you on the sheet in front of you. Okay? Let's move on to our next one. This next activity, once again, the link is shown there. There's nothing to download here, but you can look it up. Basically what we're saying is we're using poker chips, different colored poker chips, and each one will represent one event. And so perhaps if you have a black poker chip, maybe that means a long tap, and a white poker chip means a quick tap. What you're going to do is sequence out some poker chips on the table, or have the child put the poker chips on the table, and they will have to tap it out, the sequence that they have put in there for you. And they can also use different sounds if you like. Maybe a black poker chip is a bing, and a white poker chip is a doink. And so you can go bing, bing, doink, bing, bing, doink, depending on the sequence of poker chips that you're using. Have a look. There's some great ideas here. Once again, these activities are designed more for clinical use, and so forgive me if some of the language is a little more technical, but you get the idea. Let's move on to our next one. Okay, this next activity is called Secret Code. It's pretty straightforward. What we're doing is we're having the child create a new symbolic language for themselves, and so if they wanted, for example, an ice cream, they could create a symbol for an ice cream. So here's the trick. You're going to have the child create a list of nouns and verbs, and so things and actions that we can do with those things. Absolutely, start a journal and every day add at least a couple of new symbols, and use that as your guide to language. If a child is missing a word for something, then they must create a new symbol for that, okay? The last part in this coding series, it's somewhat coding related, but I'm throwing it in because it also helps to develop left-right awareness, which is absolutely essential in language production. And so this activity is called floor maps. In this case, what we're doing is we are drawing a map on the floor using safe tape, if you like, okay? And just for your reference, I like to use green painter tape on the floor. It lifts up very easily, and by the way, lift it up. Don't leave it sit there for days. Anyway, whatever you do, you test it before you do it, because I don't want to get a bunch of thumbs down because people are using the wrong kind of tape on the wrong surface. But like I said, green painter tape on carpet, that's great, or just about any flooring is great. Just lift it up when you're done. And so with that, floor maps is very straightforward. What you're doing is you're drawing out a map on the floor, and you're having the child start at the beginning of the map, and you're going to ask them then to give you directions. How are they going to get from point A to point L or P or whatever it is on the map? And they're going to have to tell you, I'm going to take one step forward, I'm going to turn left, I'm going to take another step forward, and then I'm going to turn right, maybe take 3 steps forward. You get the idea. They have to sequence out for you verbally what they're going to do to get from point A to point whatever it is you point out. I like to use different kinds of maps. I like to use maps that are somewhat varied. Maybe there's different branches to them depending on how complicated you want to be. Obviously a simpler map, a T map for example, is going to be very much easier for a small child who's having a little more difficulty. Okay? And so that's floor maps. You have a look at that map that I've included in the link that you see there. But beyond that, feel free to make your own. It's kind of fun for the child to make their own maps as well, and it makes it a little more engaging. And then to make it come to life by actually painting it out on the floor with that green painter's tape, well, that's a lot of fun too. Great for the visual motor skills for that child as well. All right? Now, with all that, that concludes the first part of this series on reading. The next part is going to be much more like reading. So in this first section on visual motor and that coding integration, it's been all about sort of getting the child ready for the idea of using language. And now we're going to move on and we're going to actually look at some language. But I think you're going to find in this next section that there's a lot of great ideas to encourage language awareness and production without ever going into actual formal language teaching, okay? I think that's kind of formal language instruction can be daunting for a lot of kids, and so I like to make them want to read, and then they will come to reading. And so these activities that follow in the next section, you'll see, just like the other activities, just with letter arranging, that kind of thing, much less daunting, and they're much more approachable for most children. Again, gaming is much more engaging, much more fun than any kind of homework that we might ask them to do. All right, I look forward to seeing you in that second part, and we'll talk to you real soon.